You're live.
Okay. All right.
So part of the tradition before he tells the story is sometimes we have to argue about something. So we're in
Yes.
story mode.
So, I need a drink.
Okay, now we are
L'chaim.
prepared.
Okay.
Him with the Guinness, I with the.
So which
The
story
bushel.
am I telling here?
I wanted you to tell the story that the Torchbearer is based off of, which I don't really know.
I'm not good about titles, so
Yeah, I
help
don't
me.
feel like. Oh, the one about building the crystal radio and.
Oh, the
story.
radio. Yes. Okay.
But I don't know that one even has really a story title either.
Well, it's just a story. Well, let's see. We went to England in 1956. My father, mother, brother, me, sister, because the Soviets were massing nuclear weapons and we were massing nuclear weapons, and the whole idea was to keep the Soviets from overrunning Europe. Now, whether they would have actually done that or not, who knows? But anyway, that's why we were there. Air Force. My dad was intelligence officer, pilot, and so on. So we went to England in 56. I was 8. In the middle of the winter, and it was cold and it was wet. It was not Texas. Totally different.
So you were in Shreveport or Texas?
We had been in Texas, Fort Worth.
Fort Worth. Okay.
Went to England, Air Force Base.
Right.
Whatever it was called. I'm going blank on that right for the moment. And so there we were in England, and the idea was that when you're back then anyway, when you were part of the military, career military as my father was, and you went to a foreign country for 4 years, that your family went with you. So that's what we were doing. And what had happened gradually over time was a culture had developed of these foreign European or Japan or wherever, Guam and so on, placed American military families would be together on Air Force bases or whatever, except there were some families, mine included, who wanted to be out where the people were, which was a good thing. So we were living in this little town called Shipton under Wychwood.
Shipton under Wychwood.
Shipton under Wychwood. It's in the Cotswolds. It's in the west,
Okay.
just this side of the Welsh border and so on. Anyway, wonderful place, wonderful people. They loved Americans because without the Americans, most of them believed, and probably rightly, they would have been overrun by the Nazis.
Mm-hmm. What year was this?
It was 56,
Okay.
1956. Previous to that, we'd been in Germany. Anyway, that's not part of this story. So I'm 8, I'm in the 3rd grade. And so, if you were one of those families, what your family usually did was went to the movies on the Air Force Base and went shopping on the Air Force Base or the Army Base or whatever it was, because these bases had movie theaters and what was called the Post Exchange, the PX grocery store, hardware store, and so on. And things were usually cheaper as well. It was a way to keep the American family sort of connected, economically, socially, and so on. And the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts, and so on.
So they brought over sort of just
Culture,
small
like little America,
yeah.
sort of.
Yeah.
So I was in the Cub Scouts, and I had this Cub Scout handbook, which I wish I still had, and in it there was a plan for what's called a crystal radio. And the crystal radios they didn't have batteries. I don't really understand where they got their energy from.
The crystal.
Yeah, but it's got to come from somewhere. Or maybe I'm wrong about that. I mean, this was in 71. This was
I think
a
you're
long
right. I mean,
time ago.
I think you make some sort of battery, or not maybe a battery, but you sort of create a power source. I mean,
well, I don't remember creating a power
remember.
source, but I do remember building this radio. I couldn't get it to work. I was, 8.
So it comes with all the pieces, all the parts?
Well, no, you had to go find them and so on. And I can't remember how I did all this. I mean, I had the book. That was it.
So that was it.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't like go. Okay, you didn't get a kit or anything.
Yeah, no. This was before the day of kits and such.
Right. Okay.
This is in the dark ages.
Right.
There's some dinosaurs still.
It's 1856, not 1956.
1956. 1856. Right. Slow on the humor.
Yeah, well, it's been true the whole time. Anyway.
As usual. Anyway, so I'm trying to build this radio, and I did. I built the radio, but it didn't work. So one day, my dad would do this sort of thing every now and again. He, without saying anything to me, he didn't help me do this or anything else. Very hands-off. Not the right way to do things, but anyway, that's the way it was. But every now and again, he would recognize that I needed something, and so he would bring stuff home. And on this occasion, he brought home components for a crystal radio that melded in with the components I had handmade, and it worked. I had these little earphones, and I could hear this tinny little voice. Well, this is out in the west of England, far away from, of course, England's not a very big place compared to the United States, obviously. So we weren't that far away from the radio stations, but we were sort of in what is equivalent to the boonies. Small town, very small town, village. And so I could just barely, I remember I could just barely get a few stations, I could barely hear them. Now fast forward.
Well, what would you get on the radio? News?
Music mostly, and you know, stuff that a kid didn't want to listen to anyway, much. And I could hardly hear it, etc. But it worked after a fashion. So I sort of gave up on that. Fast forward 3 years, I'm 11, and now we're living, or 11 and a half, now we're living in a different town, closer into London, actually in the outskirts of London. Because we, you know, well, I guess you don't know, but in those days, and probably still, the families got moved around all the time. We moved sometimes 2 times a year. I mean, we did this for years. It was just part of the way it was. You were very nomadic.
It's interesting because everything you're describing is pretty much the same, I think.
I guess. I
you
don't
know, the bases,
don't know.
and I think they still call them the PX.
I don't know.
I've heard that phrase before. I've heard that
Have
term
you?
before.
Okay, well, I guess so. Anyhow, so we're living in this little town called Chorleywood, northwest of center of London. You can get to it on the little train and so on, which was cool, very cool. The trains were wonderful in those days. Very old-fashioned, very polluting, coal-fired and all that kind of stuff. But they were great. Harry Potter trains, think Harry Potter, like that. And my grandparents, my mother's parents, came to visit. And they brought me the new thing, a transistor radio, a little portable transistor radio with batteries, and I think it had 1 transistor in it. I think that's how it worked. And it had a speaker, you know, it was an actual radio. And I had gotten over the subsequent years into reading in bed at night with a flashlight secretly. I wasn't supposed to be reading the books I was reading because they were way beyond my reading level, presumably, but I was reading them anyway. Mostly science fiction, you know, Arthur C. Clarke and such. And then I had this radio. And one night, you know, I started listening to the radio. It was, you know, the BBC Schubert Symphony in C.
Boring.
Okay, but one night, I got a story. The story, and I got right at the beginning of it, so I didn't miss any of it. And I was captured immediately because it was this guy who had somehow gotten lost in the wilderness of South America or somewhere. And he had stumbled on this village. I think that's how the story went. Again, a long time ago. 60 years ago, stumbled on this village where everybody was blind. He was the only person who had eyesight. And I was immediately captured. Turns out, I found out later this was an H.G. Wells story. He has eyesight. And I'm hanging on every word of this story because it's so imaginative, it's so different, And so here's this guy. He's very different from everybody else, which I identified with right away. I think that's part of why it grabbed me. And I listened to the whole thing, and it was great. It was wonderful, and I was pleased. And then I searched. I don't remember how long until the batteries ran out, because there was no way to get replacement batteries in those days in that place for this radio. There must have been a way to do it, but I didn't have those resources. All the subsequent nights, I don't know how many, probably at least a couple of months, never found that station again. Never got another story. And that story hung in my mind for years. And I didn't know it was an H.G. Wells story.
Yeah, I remember you didn't know what it was, and you looked for it.
I did. I very informally. I mean, I'm a kid. And then somewhere later, I don't know how much long later, 20 years or 15 years or whatever.
It was recently.
Excuse me?
It was recently.
Yeah,
When you told this story when I was a kid, you didn't know what the story was.
Oh, is that right?
Uh-huh.
Oh, well, anyway, so whenever it was, I'm telling these stories from memory. Memory on this kind of stuff is not exactly real precise for any of us, human memory. So whenever it was, somewhere in there, I was watching PBS and, public television, and there was the story. But now it was a stage play, TV play, staged, of the guy in the land of the blind.
The land of the blind.
Or whatever it's called. I think that is
what it's called, yeah.
And so there it was. And so I had to wait till the whole, because I found it right in the middle. I recognized immediately what it was. I had to wait till the end of the thing, based on a story by H.G. Wells.
Right.
The next day I went out and bought the book.
Well, and I remember when you used to tell the story, you said that you didn't hear the end of the story.
You mean when I was a kid?
Because you fell asleep.
Oh, maybe
That's how I remember it. Maybe you were embellishing because it makes for a better story, the notion that you listened to it and didn't hear the end until you were sort of seeking out the end as well as the story.
Well, maybe. I mean, I'm
itself.
not actually. Yeah, I mean, I might well have done that. I don't actually remember. But what I do remember.
That would actually be like an unembellishment.
Yeah, I guess it would. What I do remember is how captured I was by. I was into science fiction anyway. H.G. Wells was one of the original science fiction story writers.
Right.
This was not science fiction per se. Well, it wasn't science
Sort
fiction
of,
at all. But it was very
sort of.
imaginative, very...
What do you think drew you to it? I mean, what was it about this person with sight
He was totally different from everybody else, and so was I.
And what happens in the story? So he finds this place, but he has sight. I mean, it's interesting.
He has sight, they don't, yeah.
Which is an advantage.
Well, you would think, except... Now, I haven't read this story in a long time. I have read it, but I read it whenever I found it, and I haven't read it since. I should have read it, but I didn't. I've been, doing science today. But anyway, I think it captured me when I was 11 because it was about someone who was very different, and yeah, he had an advantage, but his advantage didn't fit their culture, didn't fit how they lived. So he was actually at a disadvantage, which was very much what I experienced as a child. If you're a really bright kid, super bright kid in that world, you are not real welcome.
You mean like just that world? What's that world?
American military. I hate to say this, but you're not real welcome. Now, unless you've got a family that helps you learn how to disguise it and helps you with the social skills. My family didn't do any of that. So I was just this super bright kid who annoyed the hell out of everybody.
Yeah, I was going to say.
In retrospect, I can see that.
Yeah,
But,
if you'd been taught to keep your mouth shut and just put your head down.
Yeah, and I didn't do that.
Yeah, well, that's not the Ketchum way, nor is it
Well,
the McFadyen-Ketchum way.
That's,
which we can all attest to.
True. But I think that's why it grabbed me, because what he had captured was this aloneness thing in a person who actually had an advantage, except it wasn't an advantage in that situation socially. Not an advantage at all.
It's about otherness. Yeah. I should read that poem. Here, I'm gonna trade with you.